My name is Tom Barrett, and it's the 9th of January 2013, and we're in the parlor at McInnis, and I'm with Lloyd McInnis. And Lloyd, I understand you moved to New Westminster from Saskatchewan?
Yeah, in the early 50s, actually. And when I first came out here, I was working for Westminster Iron Works, making railings for the Port Mann Bridge and also the bridge up at Agassiz. So I worked on them painting, sanding, and manufacturing. So I felt really good about that. And I was also with the Inlet Figure Skating Club on the board of directors. And I got also involved with Cubs and Scouts. I was with them for many years. And so, like I say, I worked for PV for 20 years, and then I decided I wanted to change. So I quit, and I started a bookstore. It was called Reflection Books. It's just on Austin Avenue here. And after a couple of years there, I had an opportunity to start a farmer's market on Poirier Street in Coquitlam by the rec center there and the library. And that was very interesting. I'm going to go back to the bookstore. In the bookstore, it wasn't just selling books. We did many other things. We had workshops there. We had people doing massage, tarot card reading. We had support groups for men and women. And we had a Toastmasters club, which I really liked because we competed with other Toastmasters clubs all through the Lower Mainland. And I actually won quite a few awards. And then getting back to the farmer's market, we started that and it went over very well. And we had an understanding that people had to bake or grow everything that they produced and sold there. And we had vendors, when the fruit was in season, they'd come from the Okanagan as far away as Soyuz. And what was interesting, they'd go by, say, 3 other farmer markets like Hope, Chilliwack, Abbotsford, to come to ours because they liked ours so good. So that was a success. And see what happened after that. Well, yeah, back at the bookstore after so many years there, Chapters, which is a big box store, they moved in, and there wasn't enough money there for my partner and I, so I sold my share of the store to her husband. And I joined Chapters because if you can't fight them, you might as well join them, was my understanding. And I've been also involved in different things like community center up at Dogwood, which is a very good organization. That's for senior citizens. And I also joined the Council of Canadians, which is a Canadian organization all across Canada. Maud Barley, you might have heard of her. And that's where I met Doug and his wife. And they were very involved in it. And I really want to acknowledge all the work that the Council of Canadians have did, although a lot of the chapters are closed down right now. And yeah, I'm still involved in the club, and since then I've moved to Port Coquitlam, and I just love it there. It's just everything I desire is right there. Just a block off Shaughnessy. So if you have any questions.
Yeah, well, I guess you've seen a lot of changes over the years since the 50s.
Yes.
Could you talk about some of those?
Well, traffic, for one thing, everybody talks about traffic. And the new bridge being built, that I could have never dreamt of that, you know. And it was interesting because both the Lougheed Mall and Coquitlam Center weren't there when I was living out in that area. And when the Lougheed Mall opened up, I went to it, and when the Coquitlam Mall opened up, I said I wasn't going to go there. I was going to support the small stores. But something came up about a week later. I had to go get an item, and I ended up went there. I've been going there back and forth ever since. And yeah, a lot of very good changes. I feel all the municipalities are doing very well, you know, with what they have to work with, and very supportive. And we have a good police force and fire and ambulance. And I had an ambulance driver right across the street from me, and he was very efficient. He saved a lot of people's lives. And this was in Port Moody, and when I living there was a guy by the name of Morrissey, Ed Morrissey, and he'd been in Cubs and Scouts for years. And he used to take the little cubs Saturday morning down to the police station and make them wash the police cars all the time. So they learned a lot that way. And then he also had a lathe in his workshop, and he'd let the little kids come in on a Wednesday night. And yeah, so we had a lot of good neighbors in that area, and very supportive. Anytime I needed babysitters, the parents would be right there, and vice versa, of course.
How did the neighborhood change over the years?
Well, they ended up by building bigger houses in that area, huge houses, you know, and with Port Moody building up so much, before I could just go downtown, I'd run into people I know all the time. Now I can go in that area and I don't know anybody, even the kids that have grown up there moved away, and it's all new people, as you know. Yeah.
How did you end up in New Westminster?
A friend of mine came out from Brandon, Manitoba, and stayed at his aunt's place. And he wrote me saying, you know, there's lots of work, and the weather was better and everything like that. So I ended up, I thought, actually, like I was telling her, I was trying to get away from my relations, so I thought I'd take a chance and come out here. And it was interesting. Within, I'd say, a month, my kid brother came out, and then my other brother and his wife's sister came out. It ended up, there was like 9 of us in the house for a couple of years till we started branching out and getting our own places. And it was interesting. It worked out fine.
How did you find the job once you got here?
There's lots of jobs here. In fact, I was working heavy equipment back there, and top wages was $1.50 an hour, and no overtime. We worked 12, 14 hours a day. And came out here, the guys were pumping gas for that much money, and they were getting time and a half for Sundays. So, no, it had a lot of advantages. So I enjoyed it.
And had you done, you said you worked on the Port Mann Bridge. Had you done that kind of work in Saskatchewan?
No, this was all new. It was Westminster Iron Works, and they just built, they didn't construct it, they just made the parts and made in sections and painted them and everything, and then they loaded them on a truck and took them out there. Yeah, that's what happened.
How would you like that work?
It was okay, yeah. It was dusty and dirty, and yeah.
Yeah. How did you get into opening the bookstore? I mean, that's a...
I've always had an interest in books. I've always just loved books. Go to the library every chance. I still do, every chance I can get. And a woman I know, her and her husband used to have groups that meet in their house. And we'd share stories. It's like a book club, and we'd share stories and what we're reading and stuff like that. And she was an ex-school teacher, so she knew bookkeeping and that kind of stuff. And so she kept saying, you know, should open a bookstore, and she didn't want to do it by herself. So I said, well, I can't think of anything better. So yeah, we ended up by opening a bookstore, and it's still going very strong. Both the bookstore and the farmer's market are very successful.
Yeah, and again, the farmer's market, how did that come about?
It was a woman from UBC. She was going to write a thesis about it, and when she put it all on paper, she thought, you know, this is a good idea. Maybe we could do something with it. So she put an ad in the paper, and there was 5 of us showed up, and surprise, surprise, 2 of the people I knew them from, you know, other places. One was a young girl that worked at A&W, The other guy was a school teacher, and we all just clicked and said, hey, let's start this. And we ended up getting permission from the city and got support from them. We could use a parking lot at the skating rink there and the swimming pool and that. And the total success. It's still going strong. And a lot of it is organic, and people at that time, and they still are very interested in organic food and homemade jams and jellies and stuff like that.
When was that you started?
Be 20 years ago, about 20 years ago.
It's been going all that time. That's pretty good. Had there been anything like that before in Coquitlam that you knew about?
No, there's nothing. In fact, there's one in White Rock now, one in Maple Ridge, and another one in Burnaby. They weren't there when we started up. So, in fact, a lot of them come to us and say, what did you do to get started? How did you, and just start out small and grow. Yeah. So now if I travel any place, whatever city I'm in, I'll always stop at a farmer's market and enjoy the fresh stuff they have.
You mentioned a lot of community activities that you were involved in. How did you?
I'd kind of forgotten that. It just seemed natural. One thing led to another, and I'm always interested in things, so I'm willing to take a chance. And
Is that something that people in your neighborhood generally tended to get involved in? I mean, it sounds like you're awfully busy.
Not really, just people here and there that I know, over the years or different places, and yeah. There's a demand for it. I think that's part of it,
Yeah, well, I guess with the new arena being built, I think you mentioned the new arena in Port Moody. I guess there was sort of a demand for that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Was there?
Yeah. But this market was in Coquitlam on Poirier Street right here.
Right.
Yeah, but now it was by the rink, but now it's beside Dogwood on the parking lot there.
Oh, right.
Yeah, yeah. And it's there in the summertime from spring till fall. And
I think you mentioned you were involved in the figure skating club, though, in Port Moody?
yeah, that was I was on the board of directors because my daughter was figure skating at the time. So it's interesting because she was figure skating there, and then she's growing up now, and and she's doing synchronized skating, her and a group of women. And my granddaughter is now doing figure skating, and it's by the same teacher that taught my daughter is teaching my granddaughter.
Wow.
So quite a coincidence, And actually the teacher's daughter is teaching kids too.
Wow.
So it's a close-knit community, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you mentioned people kind of moving away and stuff. It sounds like there's still a lot of continuity, though, is there?
There is, but it's not necessarily they're living there. Like the instructors now and my daughter are living in Port Coquitlam, and and the ones that started one of the ones that started the farmers market, the teacher, he's up the Sunshine Coast, retired up there, and yeah, it's a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun, to just see how the people respond to the farmers market as well as the bookstore, It's a destination location. People come from all over. If we had an event in the store, people come from a faraway's Mission.
Really?
Yeah. To hear a speaker or participate in Toastmasters or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, how did you get involved in Toastmasters?
Well, I always knew that it was very beneficial to learn to speak in public. And in school, I never got that chance. So I started the club, Toastmasters Club. We called it Crystal Clear Speakers Club, And since then, I think there's about 2 or 3 clubs in Port Moody and a couple in Coquitlam, Maple Ridge, Surrey. They've just sprouted up all over. And I got a chance to compete in a lot of them. And I was lucky enough for the humor humor speech contest. I competed in one here and then at UBC, North Vancouver. Then I would have ended up by competing for all of BC and then go to Toronto for Canada. But a couple of things kind of changed. We had to change our speech, and my next speech wasn't as good. And each time I was, we'd have a draw to who to go first. And usually they'd have somebody before that get up and tell a couple of jokes and have everybody laughing and that. And the last time I gave that talk, the guy told a couple of jokes and they didn't go over, so everybody was sitting there, you know. So it was a good experience.
Yeah, what do you remember of the first speech you ever gave?
Yes. The speech, your first speech is talking about yourself, where you grew up, what your hobbies are, so you feel quite comfortable with it. Yeah.
So what did you talk about?
Or just growing up in Saskatchewan and things like that.
Do you remember any of the speech now?
I remember talking about how cold it was in Saskatchewan going to school and how I hated frozen egg sandwiches, and I still do to this day.
Frozen egg sandwiches?
Yeah, because by the time you got to school, it was so cold, your sandwiches would be frozen, and the school wasn't warm enough to thaw them out. So, sounds funny, but it wasn't at the time. And yeah, I talked about practically grew up on horseback. Every place we went, we'd go on horseback all the time. And go into town, you go on horseback. And like a car today, people driving back and forth to work, and then on a Sunday they like to go for a drive. Well, we'd ride horseback to school and every place all during the week. Then on Sundays we'd go for a ride out someplace on horseback. And it was a good experience.
How big a family did you have?
I had four brothers, or three brothers myself, and two sisters, so there's six of us. About an average family. Not like some of them that have 12, 14 kids. And people wonder how they can do it. Well, what they do, the older kids have to look after the younger ones. So it's really not a problem, except feeding them, I guess.
Where in Saskatchewan was this?
Wadena, Kelvington.
Okay, yeah, that's whereabouts?
Northeast of Regina, about 140 miles. Yeah.
Some cold winters, I guess.
Oh yeah, a lot of top hockey players come out of there.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah. About four of them, I guess, yeah.
Which do you like better, Saskatchewan or BC?
There's no argument there. BC by far, yeah. I like to go back once in a while for a visit because I miss the prairies, I miss the sunsets, I miss the wind, I miss the open spaces, you know, the wide. Like here people talk about the mountains. I feel the mountains makes me feel closed in because I like to be seeing. There's a joke they say about when kids are small on the prairies and they say they're going to run away. And the parents say, go ahead, because they can see them for like 4 days or 20 miles down the road. So they know they'll be back. Yeah.
Did the rest of your family stay in Saskatchewan? Or?
No, like I say, they all moved out when I moved out, remember? Yeah, yeah, yeah. And since they've branched out since that, I have one in Langley and one in Chilliwack and one in Vanderhoof and one in Smithers, and yeah. A lot of changes.
Really? Yeah. Has Saskatchewan changed that much?
Saskatchewan did a 100% turn. Before it was a poverty province, and now they're the most prosperous province in Canada. They're just booming. People are leaving Alberta to go to Saskatchewan now, which is unheard of.
What changes have you noticed in, excuse me, in BC beyond the, you mentioned traffic. What other changes have you noticed?
Uh, I don't think people are quite as friendly now as they used to be, but I guess I'm looking at the traffic part of it. Otherwise, just building like Port Moody's double, triple the size it was before. Surrey's grown up. Like you used to be able to drive over to Surrey and it was like driving out in the country. Different story now, and yeah, major changes like that.
You mentioned getting involved with the Council of Canadians. How did you get involved with them?
The same thing I heard about them. I looked into a little bit about it, and I'd read for quite a few years about Maud Barlow. She's the head of the Council of Canadians. Are you familiar with her? Yeah, and I was very impressed with her work. So then when I seen in the local paper there was a meeting in Dogwood, and Doug and his wife were involved in that, that there was a meeting there. One time I went up there and I joined, and I was involved in that for quite a few years, and signing petitions, and yeah. One of Maud Barlow's biggest thing is saving the water so the Americans can't come in and take over, and all, she talks all over the world actually. Yeah.
How did, I'm just wondering, I mean, that sounds like a lot of sort of volunteer work. Did you feel at the end as if you'd accomplished anything by
Oh yeah.
being it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Talk about that. What did you accomplish?
Well, I feel there's no sense complaining about things, the government or anything else, if you don't do something about it, you know, and there's more of us than there is of them. So I just feel if you can get organized and get enough people to speak up and say something or write a petition or whatever, it's like the thing that's going on right now with the Indians. What do they call that?
Idle no more?
Idle no more. I think they're totally successful. They're right on track with what they're doing, you know. And people are saying, oh, you need something definitely to zero in on. No, they're covering everything. They don't have to zero in on one thing because there's too many other things. And they're not only the Indians, but they're trying to get the working man or whatever in also. And I feel they're going to be successful, even other parts of the world. And one of the reasons I think this is a year of change a lot is because everybody's got cell phones and things can happen so fast. You know, if you want to bring up a subject or whatever, just put it on Facebook or whatever, and people either support it or they won't. But at least they have a choice. They know what's going on. I was a strong believer in the union years ago. I used to belong to the union, and I think it's the detrimental to the country that they've been squashed.
Which unions did you belong to?
IWA.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That was at PV, did you
Yes.
say? Yeah.
They call it Canfor now, but
Right. Yeah, how, could you talk a bit more about how unions have changed over this time? I mean,
Well-
the IWA used to be pretty powerful at one time
Right.
in BC.
well, I think part of it is the leaders were too friendly with the companies, and they weren't strictly for the men. I think that was a big one.
What were attitudes to unions like back in the
Pardon?
50s? What were people's attitudes towards unions like in the 50s?
Well, they weren't all for it, but it had its pros and cons like every other organization, you know. But the good part about it is, you know, if you had a grievance, you could go to the union, and quite often they would help you. You know, like somebody, if they were injured, for instance, the company would talk you to come back into work again. Well, you're still injured. And they'll say, oh, you can sit in the office and we'll pay you. Well, then if that same problem come up later on, they'd say, oh, we got no proof of you being injured. and you'd lose everything. A lot of people had injured backs. My brother was one of them, and that's what happened to him. And you know, if the people and the companies and the unions were in integrity in everything they did, you wouldn't have to have all this, you know, fighting and bickering and whatever. If that makes sense.
You know, can you think of examples where the union sort of helped you personally?
Yes, one instance, I'd been with the company for quite a while, and one of the foremans, his son was working there, and he just started a little while, and they put him in a job ahead of me. So, you know, what do you say? That's an example.
And the union
Yeah.
dealt with
They
the.
dealt with it and seen that it was, yeah.
Yeah. So what did you have to do? Did you have to file a grievance?
No, the union representative just went to the boss and said, hey, this is not right, you know. If you keep it up, you don't know what's going to happen. Everybody might walk off the job.
It sounds like you follow current events pretty closely. Are there any sort of big political issues over the years that really kind of stand out in your memory?
Well, Tommy Douglas was a great leader, and he did more for people than anybody else in Canada, I think, you know, when he was in power. You probably know him too, do you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. He brought in Medicare in Saskatchewan when no other province or anybody in Canada was interested in it at all. And part of the reason he did it is because when he was a kid, when he was young, he had a bad leg, and he had to have it operated on it, and he didn't have any money, and so he would have had to spend the rest of his life like that. And the doctor stepped in and said, I'll do it for nothing. And that was before he got into politics, and he thought, hey, you know, everybody should have that freedom to be looked after. So he fought long and hard to get that passed, and it was the time of the Depression, so nobody had money. So that's why, you know, all the problems we have now with health benefits and that, it shouldn't be, because the money is there. It's the management of the money as much as anything, you know.
Yeah. Hey, what was it like before Medicare?
Well, it's interesting, because I'll tell you a story. My mother, it was in the wintertime, and she was knitting, and the knitting needle went into her hand, and within hours it caused blood poison. And so Dad hooked up the horses in the middle of the winter, took her into town, and took her to the doctor, and that was to Calvinton. The doctor looked at it and said, I'm going to have to take her arm off. So Dad turned around, went back home again, and she soaked her hand in hot water and salt while he hooked up the horses. And then he took her to Wadena, going the other way. And the doctor looked at it and said, oh, we can save her hand. She's in the hospital for 6 months. And afterwards, her hand, she could hardly move her fingers, but she could still do anything anybody else did, you know, drive the car, cook, or whatever. And for years and years, I could never figure out how Dad was so smart that he knew to go to that other one. And I was talking to my brother about 5, 6 years ago. He said, oh yeah, it's easy. He said that's when Tommy Douglas brought in Medicare, and only the bigger hospitals got it. So if Dad hadn't went in and her in there for 6 months, he would have lost the farm and everything else. So I'm very supportive of Tommy Douglas and what he did. There are people out there, it only takes one person to change the world for the better.
How old were you when that happened to your mother?
I was so small when Mom came home, I wouldn't have anything to do with her. I was about 3 years old, I guess.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah.
But you still remember?
No, I didn't. No, I don't even remember that, to tell you the truth. I was given to the neighbors to be looked after.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. So I don't remember going to the hospital. I don't know if I ever did when Dad went in to visit. And there again, the neighbors were wonderful. You know, the neighbors' older girls would come over and do some cooking and do the washing and just all kinds of stuff, you know, look after us. And that's what it's all about.
Yeah, some people say there was more of a sense of community years
Oh,
ago.
by far, yes, yeah.
Can you, any other examples of that?
Well, I find it interesting because the schools, I don't agree with the schools that much. And I figure that in a lot of cases, the schools do more harm than good, especially the smaller schools like out in the country. And for instance, my dad only went to, I think he went to either grade 4 or 5. And here's a man that could do literally anything. When he was farming, he'd take a granary and could figure out how many bushels and how many to seed. And he was a blacksmith. He made all kinds of runners for the sleighs, cabooses, and he was a veterinarian. He could cure horses from the neighbors that come around, even though there was a vet down the road. The neighbors had come to him to, if they had a horse that was sick. And he drove 4 and 6 horse outfits at the Brandon Fair. And he had the first machinery, before it was all horses, the first tractor and the first car in the area. And he could take the motor of the car apart when it wasn't working, send to Regina for a part, and then put the whole thing back together again. Now here's a man with like literally no education, self-taught. You know, and I'm not near as smart as him, and I went to school. So.
He sounds like a remarkable man.
Well, most of them, you know, if you're farming, you had to know all that kind of stuff. You know, it's just automatic. You grew up with it. I'll tell you another story to do with Toastmasters. There was a man came from the States, and he had 3 businesses. He had a construction company, an insurance company, and a real estate company. And I went over to hear him talk in one of the in the hotel in Surrey there. And when I went in, he took our picture and asked a little bit about it, each one, and there was about 30, 40 of us there, eh? And then he gave a talk and showed some film and stuff like that. And then at the end, he'd had the film sent out, and it was on slides, and he'd put up each person's picture, and he'd say something about the person that he liked or whatever. And at the end, he told a story where, because he couldn't read or write, and he went to the bank to get some papers done for his businesses, because it was all just with a handshake, and then the lawyers would take over. And he went in, there was a young guy behind the counter, and he said, you know, you have to sign this paper. And the guy signed it with an X, and the little guy behind the counter said, wow, he said, you can't even read or write? The guy said, no. And he said, boy, if you could read or write, where do you think you'd be today? And the guy said, behind the counter like you are. Which is true, you know? So.
What was school like when you went?
Oh. It wasn't like the schools you see nowadays. We had some teachers that, one teacher from Ontario had been retired for 20 years, and he had no interest in what he was doing at all, you know. So we'd get him talking about Ontario and the maple trees and how to cut them and stuff like that. If we wanted a Friday afternoon off, and he'd spend all the time telling us the same story he's told us before. And I found it interesting because there was only, what was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think there was 8 of us, that was counting the teacher, and that was in all grades from 1 to grade 8. And 2 of the kids, their parents had been teachers before, so they were like a month ahead of the teacher, and the rest of us were we were graded according to those others, so it didn't show up too good.
It was a one-room schoolhouse,
Yes.
was it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. How did they manage to teach all those different grades all at once?
Because there was only 6 students, 7.
Personalized instruction, I guess, eh? Or...
They didn't give any of us that much time. And like I say, a couple of the kids, their parents taught them, and so they were way ahead of, so they didn't. I felt sorry for some of the teachers, actually, you know.
You were a rough bunch, were you, kids?
Not really. We just pulled different tricks on them. One of the teachers lived about an hour away on horseback, and she'd come to school on a Monday, and she had an alarm clock. She'd sit on the desk, and we'd go up and turn it a few minutes, a few minutes, and a few minutes. And then she'd leave the school at 4 o'clock, and she'd find out she was home at 3:30. She couldn't figure it out for the longest time. So we did things like that, and yeah.
What sort of things did you do for entertainment when you were growing up?
Hunting, riding horseback, and a lot of work, you know, the chores, spring and morning and evening, feeding cows, milking them, feeding the horses, and cleaning out the barns and do all that kind of stuff. And we made fun out of it all the time, yeah. Visiting the neighbors, and that was always exciting. There's a lot, other people can tell a lot of stories about the prairies too, but there was 2 of my brothers, myself, and the neighbor had 3 boys, besides a couple of older ones and a girl and that. And it ended up that sometimes they'd come over to stay overnight, and of course the bed wasn't that big, so the bed would be long ways like this. We'd sleep crossways. One person's head here, and the other one here, and the other one here, all 6 on the, like that. Well, it'd be cold in the bedroom, so pull the blankets over our head, it'd be fine until somebody let off a stink bomb, and then everybody, what are you doing, what are you doing?
You're talking about chores. Did you have particular chores that you had to do?
Yeah. Split the wood and bring it in, you know.
How did you like that?
It was just one of the things you had to do, which reminds me of a story of a guy that was a trapper up in northern Saskatchewan, and he was trapping in June and July or whatever when he wasn't supposed to, and the Mounties were after him all the time, and they caught him once, let him go, second time let him go, the third time they threw him in jail, and it was in the spring. And he knew the Mounties hated cutting wood, so he said to them, I'll cut you enough wood to last all winter if you'll let me go by the time I finish cutting it, even if my time isn't up. And so he went over and measured the stove and went out, and he cut a whole big pile of wood, just beautiful. The end of July, and they said, well, a deal's a deal, away you go. He went. The first frost came, and the policeman went out and grabbed an armful of wood, opened the door, threw it in. It was about that much too long. He had to cut it all over again. So I don't know what the end of that story was, but so he probably had a good laugh about that till they caught up to him again.
So what differences did you notice sort of going from the farm and that kind of life to moving out here to New West? And,
well, for one thing, you could go to a movie any day of the week, you know. It was interesting, the story I tell is when you're on the farm, if it rains, you can't plow the fields, you can't bring in the hay, you can't do any of that. So a lot of the farmers go into town and go into the beer parlor and all meet there. Well, I used to go into town a lot when it rained, and if I was working for this neighbor, he'd say, okay, you have the rest of the day off or whatever, we'd go into town. Well, when I come to BC here, it was raining all the time. I had a hard time working. I think, oh no, take the day off. So,
Of course, you were in town when you
That's
got
right.
here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Was that a big change going from the farm to a
Yeah,
city?
yeah.
What kind of differences did you notice?
well, people around all the time, the stores opening and closing, and you could go to a movie anytime you wanted, you know, in the afternoon or the evening or whatever. On the farm, you couldn't do that. You couldn't get into town half the time. The roads were too poor.
Yeah. How many movie houses were around here back then?
In New Westminster, I think there was only the one downtown. That was Raymond Burr Theater House now or something. That was a movie theater before, I think, and he had something to do with that. That's where he started out acting or something, I think. Yeah.
How about Port Moody? Did they have theaters out there? Or?
No, they had the drive-ins at that time. They had a drive-in in Burnaby, and they had a drive-in in Surrey, and they were popular. Yeah. You probably went there yourself.
You bet. Yeah. Yeah, there was one in Burnaby.
On the Lloyd Highway there, just off there, yeah. It's a shame they died down, you know, but that's what they call progress. Sometimes I feel like it's going backwards. There's a story about an old couple went to a drive-in movie in Saskatchewan. When they came back, their neighbor said, "What show did you see?" And they said, "Oh, we've seen Closed for the Season." I guess they sat there through the whole thing and didn't realize there was no movie.
Kind of a dull show, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. But,
So when you started working out here, how much did you get paid?
$1.50 an hour, which was pretty good at that time. Yeah.
What would that buy? Just trying to get a sense of, because there's been so much inflation since then. Just try to get a sense of how.
You're probably better off then than you are now with the difference, although there's a lot of sales right now, you know. But buying a house and a car and stuff like that, it was comparable, you know. You could do it that way.
Did most people own their own homes, or they rent? Or?
When you're younger, you rent it, but most of them, you know, when they get into their 30s or whatever, I would say, yeah, because there wasn't that many apartments then for renting. A lot of people would buy a house and put a suite in the basement or something, or have somebody move in and rent it that way, help pay for it. I know in Surrey, when I first came out here, and I wish I had did something about it, but they had property out there. They'd rent it, but your rent would go towards the payment. And you don't hear that nowadays.
Yeah.
And that was for acreage out there. Some of the guys I worked with, they ended up, they were foremen, and they pooled all their money all the time, bought property and fixed things up. And you know where Guilford is? Mm-hmm. They owned all that property, and they sold it and they made a fortune.
I'll bet.
Yeah, property was valuable and kept going up, 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 up.
Yeah, I think you had some notes. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about, or any other topics I haven't asked you about?
No, I think I covered everything pretty well. Yeah, just doing what else? Yeah, I worked here for PV at one time, so I got to know quite a few French people from Millardville here, and there's quite a few Italians working there, and different nationalities, and yeah. I worked actually in what they call the hardboard. That's where they compress hardboard panels. And then I didn't like working inside that much, so I bid on a job on the river where we were cutting logs and bringing them up the raceway and that. And so that was better because we were outside all the time. But you're walking on the logs all the time, and you had to wear a life jacket and a pike pole, and you had to watch what you were doing. I was out there for 5 or 6 years, I guess, and I only fell in twice, and that was the reason for that is the pole I was using broke, and that's why I fell into the water. But some guys, one guy came from in the mill. He was sent out one afternoon. He fell in 3 times in like a half an hour, so they sent him home. But I also remember it getting really cold. The Fraser River, I understand, and I've seen pictures of it, where it froze over, and they'd take horse and sleigh across. Maybe you've heard of that.
No.
Yeah, it was frozen over. And when we were working there bringing the logs in, there was times where we had to use dynamite to, like the logs were cut like this in a row like that. We had to use dynamite to bust the ice to get them into the mill.
Wow.
So yeah, it used to get cold. They talk about cold now, but nothing compared to what it was then.
Well, what was it like falling in the river? That must have been.
It was a surprise.
Yeah, it must have been cold.
It was in the summertime when I went in, so I was fine, yeah. And we wore the logging boots with cleats on the bottoms to get better grip, yeah, so, yeah.
So were there a lot of French Canadians in Millardville still when you first moved out here?
Oh yeah, there's a lot, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I think there's still quite a few. I'm not sure, but I imagine so.
Yeah, I think a lot of the families, I just live up the hill, and I think a lot of the families have kind of moved off, and, you know.
You know, yeah, but according to the population, there was like, say, 100 before. Now there's thousands, we'll say. So if there's still 100 here, that's a lot compared to what there was before, you know, their kids or whatever, yeah. It's amazing how people came out from back east, Ontario and Quebec, and came to this area and, you know, started the industries here, the mills and whatever else. And
Yeah. Was there anything else, or anything else you want to talk about?
no, I don't think so. I'm living in Port Coquitlam now, and I really, really enjoy it there. I'm in walking distance of the library, which makes me happy, and the skating rinks there. Go skating with grandkids, and the senior center is there, and everything else, the restaurants and drugstores and dental doctors, pizza house, you name it. So right there within walking distance. And I just walk a half a block if I want. If the weather gets bad, snowing or whatever, jump on the bus to go to work. So I got no problems.
So how many days a week do you work at?
It varies. It varies different days, different times of the year. Yeah, yeah.
You're sort of on call, I guess, are you? Or?
I have been over the years on call a lot of the times because somebody phones in sick, then they want somebody that's willing to come in, you know.
Yeah. How's that compare to running your own bookstore?
It's a totally different experience, you know. Totally different experience.
How so?
Well, you don't have the worries here that, I shouldn't say the worries of the responsibilities, I guess is more, but no, I like that both places for different reasons, you know. And I learned so much when had Reflections bookstore, just all kinds of stuff. I got involved in a lot of health things. I don't know if you ever heard of Reiki or rebirthing or reflexology, working on the bottom of your feet. I was involved in all that kind of stuff, and tarot card reading and massage, and yeah, it was a very versatile area. And we not only had the store open during the day and on Sundays, but most evenings we had it open for something too. We'd have somebody come in if they wanted to give a talk, and there was times when, say, the store was so big, we'd have a speaker coming in, and the place would be so packed, people would be standing outside the door trying to listen in. Wow. So it was very successful that way. It'd go in spells of what they were people were interested in at the time, you know. Course in Miracles is one of the things. It's a set of books that just helps you look at the world different and very positive, and it's changed a lot of people's lives that I know of. So it's interesting because I was teaching it at one time, and a woman from Vancouver was co-leading it with me. And this was a Wednesday, and we thought, what are we going to talk about Friday night? And neither one of us could think what we wanted to talk about. And the book is like 365 pages. We said, we're on the phone, we said, let's open it up and whatever page and see what it suggests. Believe it or not, we opened it up, it was the same page.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's the type of book it was.
So the bookstore kind of specialized in
metaphysical bookstore, yeah.
Was that an interest of yours originally, or did you become interested in it from learning?
I'd always been interested in, have you ever heard of Edgar Cayce?
Yeah, oh, yes, yeah.
Yeah. So I was a follower of him for a long time, and you know, a strong believer in that, and probably I've been involved in bookstores in past lifetimes probably, and it's interesting. Have you read some of his books?
I remember years ago reading one of his books. He was an American.
Yeah, and he could lay down, go into a trance, and tell you your past, your future, and everything, yeah. But we have free will, so it's not necessarily going to happen unless you choose that. Because I met a guy from Ontario that has the same powers as that, and I had a couple of readings from him, and he said the probability of this or this, and I didn't do that, so I didn't go that way. I went another way.
When did you first get interested in?
Ever since I was 10 or 12 years old, I guess.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I read a book, I'm trying to remember the name of it. It was about this hypnotherapist took this girl back, until she was about 2 years old, and then all of a sudden he said something, and she talked in another voice, and she was from England, and she had a child, and they actually left there and went back to England, took her back, and there was a man there in the store, and he remembered the people there and remembered her because she died at a young age, about 19 or 20, and he remembered her when she was that age. And he just looked at her and said, oh yeah, I remember. So that got me curious too. And I've read hundreds of books on that subject. And I've experimented a little bit. I did hypnosis with people, and yeah.
What was that like?
It's very interesting, yeah. You have your mind won't let you do anything literally that's going to harm you or do anything else, eh? And I've did lots of other things that were exciting. I went river rafting, which was exciting, and I went skydiving when I was in my 60s, and that was exciting. And I was one of the first ones to do a fire walk in BC here. That was 50 years ago. Somebody came up from California and did it out in Richmond in a hotel parking lot. And when I walked across, there was a hot coal right there on my foot. And I got through the other side, and I said, oh, I can feel a little burning. And the instructor said, oh, I forgot to tell you, you got to wipe your feet off afterwards because the coals will stick to your foot. So then I went through the second time, and it was okay. Yeah.
Were you scared before you did it?
Not really, no. I'd read so much about it. I knew other people do it all the time. And I often want to do it again. There's a woman up by Harrison Hot Springs. She's like in her 70s, and she was doing it. And I talked to people who were in real estate, and their whole organization went up there and did it. And their sales went up afterward by quite a bit. So, yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, well, tell me about skydiving. What made you decide to do
That's kind of a long
that?
story because the guy didn't explain it properly, and when I was pulling the rope to steer it, because you come down like this, and the wind comes this way, then it's going to stop you, so you come down gentle. Well, I came down this way with the wind behind me, and I hit the ground, and it was... So two of us put in complaints because he didn't teach it properly.
Did you get hurt? Or?
It shook me up, yeah. It shook me up quite a bit. Nothing broken or anything. Yeah.
Something you try again? Or?
No, I've got no interest. I've did it so I don't have to go back and do it again. So, but I'd encourage anybody to do it, but I'd encourage them to go tandem, like be on the back of somebody else and let them control everything.
Right.
Actually, the story about skydiving, that's the one I gave for a humorous speech contest because I just changed it right around. I just made everything so funny that people just cracked up laughing when I started telling about it.
Doesn't sound like it was too funny at the time, though.
Well, it was up till that point, till I landed, yeah. So.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you very much, Lloyd.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.